Welcome to Absolute Cardboard, I'm Alan, and I've been looking for a Legends deck for quite a while. Yes, there are a lot of commanders designed to facilitate a Legend strategy, but cards like Jonah the Unifier, Shanid Sleeper's Scourge, or even Javi Allfather. However, a lot of these commanders are a bit direct for me. I really want a commander for Legends that doesn't outright give up the game plan. Instead, I broadened my search outside of Legend and looked more into Historic, which encompasses Legends as well as artifacts and sagas. I went back to one of my older videos and started giving Alistair the Brigadier a stronger look. Alistair the Brigadier is a 4-mana value Bant commander that's 3/3. When you cast a historic spell, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. Then, whenever Alistair attacks, you can pay 8 mana. When you do, creatures you control get +X/+X until the end of the turn. X is equal to the total number of historic permanents that you control. This deck will focus mostly on Legends with occasional artifacts that help out our cause. I've foregone sagas as I never really like cards that come into play and then die on their own. Instead, we'll be trying to synergize our Legends with each other and use Alistair as a finisher. If you like high quality EDH videos, feel free to like or subscribe, or check out my Patreon to help me get through my chemo treatments and general life expenses. Without further ado, here's Alistair the A-lister. We'll start with the sculpting, as the trajectories of Legends in these decks all spawn from these different ways to exploit sculpting to get extra cards. We have 3 trajectories that the bulk of our drawing and sculpting will come from: life gain, counters, and tokens. You probably could get a better return if you limit to just 1 or 2 tangents for sculpting, but I like having a wide variety to prevent me from getting hated out by a random stacks piece. We start with kind of figureheads for each trajectory, life gain being Shana Purifying Blade, which will let you stock up quickly. For counters, we're going with Falco Spara, Pact Weaver, which will let you remove +1/+1 counters to play the top cards of your deck. And wrapping up is our token benefactor, Benny Brax, which will get us a card every time a token comes into play, which with Alistair should be pretty often. Now that our overall strats are in play, let's talk about some of the specific in our sculpting package, and there's no better way for us to start than with Captain Sisay, which will just tap to tutor for a legendary creature or for any other type of legendary, which primarily will be tutoring for lands. Esper Sentinel is a fine mana tax for a card draw, and since it's an artifact, it will trigger Alistair. Bonnie Paul Clearcutter is my own personal choice because I have a thing for tall women with oxes. Arcade Ganon will let you loot and eventually cast a few things for free. We have a good little package of humans and artifacts, and we should be able to get out free casts pretty quickly. Note that the quest counter on Arcade can be removed for Spara uses. Chulainn Teller of Tales is something I've just never used before. I never built a deck around it, and I run a ton of creatures in this deck, so I imagine it's pretty good here. Reki the History of Kamigawa will let you draw a card each time you cast a legend, and we're a legend deck, so duh. Galadriel Light of Valinor will trigger each time a creature enters, so Alistair will buff the triggers here. This could be considered ramp or even counters, but I think the safest bet is sculpting, though who really cares how she's classified, she's really good. The 4th Doctor will let you look at the top of your library, but then cast a historic card or play a historic land. We run an abundance of legendary lands to help make this hit more often. It also makes a food which can help with token creation and life gain. Last is the Gaffer, which is a cool ass nickname. Feel free to call someone in your group the Gaffer and see how much they love it. Additionally, this works well with our small food dynamic that assists with our life gain, as most of our life gain is in chunks of at least 3. I'm going to follow up with ramp since I think it's a lot and it's pretty diverse and frankly, real useful aside from just being ramp. Let's start with the basics, and that's 2 mana artifact rocks. Azorius Signet, Selesnya Signet, Simic Signet, Talisman of Progress, and Unity are all good naturally since they share historic. Oh, I also run Arcane Signet. That's right bitches, she's back. 1 year is up. Kinnan Bonder Prodigy is going to be real good since we have a lot of things besides lands that tap for mana. Even with just mana rocks, Kinnan will get us closer to the Craterhoof effect from Alistair, and he'll do it really quickly. Delighted Halfling is good, but I can't feel like this is the weakest in the ramp section. I don't know, the 1 casting cost is going to be relevant like 1 in 13 times whenever you get it in your opening hand. However, I think this is somewhat like Soul Ring in that when it does come up it's a huge swing, so it stays here for now. Ashdod's Altar is going to be good to get a Craterhoof trigger, if not multiple. Remember, each soldier token from Alistair will count for 2 if you want to dump them all into the pit. Susan Foreman is just a mana rock dork, but she's historic, and can help if your pod decides to play Plane Chase variants. Mox Amber and Relic of Legends are legendary powered ramp and are really good, especially Relic of Legends, which can ramp you way ahead of schedule. Growing Rites of Itlamok will also ramp you way ahead when you flip it, so between your commander and the token it makes from this, you're pretty much all the way to a Gaia's Cradle. Jaheira, Friend of the Forest, will turn all your soldiers into mana dorks, and that's a lot of mana dorks. Similarly, Catilda Dawnheart Prime will be a mana dork itself, but will also turn your humans into mana dorks. It should be noted that the tokens from Alistair are not human, even though they totally are. Otherwise, there are 21 humans in the deck, so you still have a good chunk of cards that will become mana dorks. Rounding out the ramp is Rickshaw Pima Renegade, which will work with your counter synergy to turn your creatures into mana dorks. Next, I want to talk about our defenses. Since we want a lot of stuff out in play and a lot of mana to turn everything into Crater Hoofs, we need some defense to keep our stuff in play. We'll start with the most replaceable in Dauntless Escort, Guardian of Faith, and Selfless Spirit. These are all good, but they aren't historic, so they don't mesh well with most of the deck. They're just there to save our stuff. The alternative section will have some other options that you might be interested in. You could also lump in Gold Forged Thopteryx, but I think it's pretty nice giving ward to all your legendaries, and since it's an artifact creature, it'll trigger your commander. Malira the Living Cure and Safi Eric's Daughter are redundant, but will save a key piece on your board. Pippin, Guard of the Citadel, will do similarly, but it will need to be out of turn to be online, with the upside that it's repeatable. Boromir, Warden of the Tower, and Lavala Shieldgate both give all your creatures protection. They're really good, but having your protection on the battlefield will let everyone know what you got ahead of time. Shalai, Voice of Plenty, and Sigarda, Font of Blessings will give us some hexproof, with Sigarda also being somewhat of a sculpting card since we do have a good chunk of humans to cast from the top of our deck. Tashar, Sister's Apostle is just real good value. Most of our stuff is historic, and we have a bunch of really good creatures under 3 mana. I start with Oko, Thief of Crowns because I had an original full art version from Throne of Eldraine that I finally found a home for, and then the Thunder Junction version came to me in a pack, so I need another spot for it. But also, making food helps, it's good control, and a historic card to boot. Kellen, Inquisitive Prodigy will give you potential ramp and investigate, and then become an artifact nuker once the creature side has been cast. Kolga the Titanate will start nuking artifacts or enchantments once it starts attacking, but it will also fight someone when it comes into play. You also have a good amount of humans to bounce this and give it indestructibility. Just works really well in the deck. Lorn of the Third Path is a great just enchant with legs, and those legs might get you some card draw in the right circumstances. Commander Sophia Daguerre will destroy a legendary permanent in exchange for a junk token. So in a way it's a type of Chaos Warp removal. It costs your opponent so much more, but you're still limited in what you can destroy. Still, destroying a legend isn't too hard to do when legends are commanders, and you can always destroy one of your own legends to get junk token if you're in a real bad spot. You're going to be pretty aggressive, so you want some protection on your turn, and all these cards will turn off casting for your opponents. Dosan the Fallen Leaf is going to be the standard for this section. It won't affect you much as you don't have a ton of spells to cast on your opponent's turns. Kutsil Melamed Exemplar will only turn off your spells on your turn, which is terrific. It also works with your counter strategy to get you an extra card here and there. Dragonlord Dramoka is a big beater, but will also turn off your opponent's spells during your turn. Having itself be uncounterable is also really nice. Forcing your opponents to reveal their plans when you cast it is a solid way to know if you should go for a Craterhoof type kill or not. Last but definitely not least is Myrel, Shield of Argive, which turns off opponent's spells and activate abilities of most things during your turn. That would be enough, but it also creates a ton of extra soldier tokens. I only run 3 wipes since I generally want the board to stay on board. Austere Command and Farewell are super versatile, almost to the point where I'm running them in every white deck that I can, which, I'll be honest, is getting kind of boring. I also run an Urza's Ruinous Blast, which isn't a super clean white, but it does usually leave you with a distinct advantage. We'll start with Samwise Gamgee, which will make us a ton of food tokens to get our stuff back, but also gain us a bunch of life. I feel like I should point out that with the Lord of the Rings cards, this entire deck could be food based. If that's a choice you want, I'll have plenty of alternate food cards in the alternative section, but here I wanted a more complex strategy as opposed to a linear strategy. Paladin Dance Steel Maverick can protect a lot of your creatures, so much that it might be better slotted into the defense section, but a 3 for a 3/3 with Vigilance and Lifelink is a great stat line for a deck that cares somewhat about life gain. Celestine the Living Saint hits that 3 lifelink threshold that will trigger the Gaffer for drawing a card, while at the same time returning your creatures to play. Don't forget that this can be paired with other life gain to return something big. Lethiel the Bounteous Dawn looks a little underpowered, but it does work on 2 of our strats, life gain and counters, which makes it pretty invaluable for us. Rounding out the life gain is Aragorn and Arwen Wed. This is another card that will do double duty, putting counters on stuff and giving us a good chunk of life gain. Old One Eye and Suruk and Goreclaw are a few cards that give us trample, which makes Elser's Craterhoof ability a bit more like an actual Craterhoof. Overseer Vault 76 will get you counters from a lot of our creatures, from Alistair as well. Then you can parlay 3 counters into a counter for each creature. Also, don't underestimate the value of giving all your creatures vigilance. Broker's Ascendancy is going to give you counters and lots of them every turn. It's that simple and that good. Kellen Joins Up is like a super-powered Broker's Ascendancy, which is already pretty good. This will get you a small plot, but sometimes a small plot is all you need. Arwen Weaver of Hope will also give you a ton of counters, including on your soldier tokens from Alistair. Ideally, you want Arwen to get a token on herself so she can start putting more than just +1/+1 counters on stuff, but a constant flow of +1/+1 counters is totally worth it. A lot of these are unnecessary in the large picture. However, having more historic lands makes the 4th Doctor even better. We'll start with Minas Tirith and the Shire, mostly because they need a legendary creature to enter play untapped. I think having a few tapped lands under certain situations is totally fine, especially considering the upside of both Minas Tirith and the Shire. I run both Iganjos, the castle and the seat of the empire respectively, and they're both totally useful. Flagstones of Trocaire is probably the first card I would cut for something else. We don't have a ton of ways to get this in the graveyard. In a perfect world, I would probably replace this with Caracas and try to rule 0 it in, something along the lines of restricting it to where I can't target commanders with it or something. Okina Temple to the Grandfathers and Pendelhaven will give a little buff to your creatures, but they are mostly here to act as historic lands. Otawara Soaring City is great, and Trenzalore Clock Tower is interesting. I have a few Time Lords, but nothing consistent. I guess it's a good effect to have in your back pocket just in case. Yavimaya Cradle of Growth will help smooth out the mana while still being a historic card. I earn 4 lands that will generally get me Bant, then run 6 Azorius lands, 6 Simic lands, and 7 Silesia lands. That's just how the deck fills out. I finish off the deck with 1 of each basic land, island, forest, and plains. Since I consider the EDH deck a piece of art, I brought a lot of paints that you might want to use. We'll start the alternatives with sculpting. Probably number 1 on my replacement list that I considered was Elamdari Corvicadol. I don't know how to pronounce that, and I'm sorry if that offended you. Which would work nice since the deck we have is mostly creatures, and the tokens from Alistair make Elamdari's ability really powerful. Bez of the Bounding Springs seemed okay during deck construction, but I think I would prefer a card that did one thing well and repeatedly. Bezda does a lot, but it's just okay and it's only one time. Idol of Oblivion is pretty good since you'll be making a token, but I think I've been using a lot lately, and actually it's just 1 draw on your turn. It's a little underpowered considering the other sculpting alternatives. Jo Grant was considered for a bit, but you really want a reanimation version of this deck for her to shine. I guess she's also okay for just cycling a legend who isn't useful at the moment, but I would rather just run cards that are generally not useless in a lot of situations. Peregrine Took was in the deck when there was a heavier focus on food. Unfortunately, food fell off, and so did this fool of a Took. Rigo Streetwise Mentor's probably okay, but it's still the idea of just getting 1 draw on your attack. Doesn't seem super great, especially when you consider the rest of the card. Sarah Jane Smith was considered in a version that was a bit more artifact sacrificey. That version never really made it far, but if you do want to do a lot of clue token shenanigans, go for it. War of the Last Alliance early on seemed like a no-brainer, but at 4 mana for a tutor and then another one on turn 5 at best, I don't know, it doesn't seem that great to me, even though I will say as a saga it does trigger Alistair. I will say after some play I could totally see this earning a spot. The Great Henge seemed really good, but you don't have enough power on 1 creature to get this out quickly. It could be good to cast on a Craterhoof turn, but I would rather help it ramp before that point. I mentioned a few non-historic creatures that didn't really fit, and I think you could probably replace them with instant speed spells like Teferi's Protection, Akroma's Will, or Heroic Intervention. I also toyed with the idea of K9 Mark I, though I would rather stick with the Gold Thopter thing. I didn't run a lot of things that buffed historic cards itself, but I did for a minute. Cards like Day of Destiny or The Flowering of the White Dream seemed good in that build. I liked having Excalibur Sword of Eden just to make kind of a larger threat out of nowhere. I still wish I could find a spot for Rift Capuchin Ship's Mage, since this deck is really creature based and being able to get some stuff out at instant speed would be nice. However, just running 1 such card in this deck would make it a crapshoot to see if this is even worth it in that strategy. Curse of Fenric is probably good, but I'm not reading that entire card. Trial of a Time Lord also seems good, but the idea that they can just come back depending on the vote, I think I would just prefer normal removal. There was going to be a sub-theme of controlling the battlefield, starting with Miri, Weatherlight Duelist, and Odric, Master Tactician. That ended up being kind of not what I wanted, but I think you can still fit this package in. The The Wandering Emperor is nice because, as mentioned before, I don't have a ton of instant speed removal, so this would be nice as an alternative to instant speed removal. I was going to run cards that helped with Alistair tokens, and I still run some stuff that does, but if you want to go heavy token, these are the cards for you. Obviously, Mondrak Glory Dominus will double your Alistair tokens. This is another card that I seem to be running a lot in white, so I'm fine with it being on the bench here. Inga and Iska seem real promising, using your Alistair tokens to cast legends and drawing you some cards. I could see a final deck list with this in it and not be mad about it. Farmer Cotton would be a shoo-in when this deck was still a food deck, still might be powerful enough otherwise. Song of Freyalise was in consideration for a while, but I don't like the part where the big buff is seen from a mile away. I prefer to just roll with Alistair's ability to be a constant threat. King Darien something or other is also good if you're planning to go heavy tokens, and will also serve as some defense for those tokens. It's important to remember that Planeswalkers are legendary and that makes them historic, although I don't run a ton in this deck. Planeswalkers don't get the big Alistair buff after all, but if you want some Planeswalkers, here's some Planeswalkers I almost ran. I like Jace Reawakened for some cheap plotting, but my deck's mana value cost rate hit a bit higher than 3 mana, so this wouldn't really work out a lot. Karn Liberated would be like my 103rd card. Mostly it's a premier removal engine, but the 7 mana value, it's okay in this deck, but it is a lot. Nissa Ascended Animist is another one of those interaction pieces I would have liked to have, but I think this mana value just to destroy artifacts or enchantments seemed worse than Karn. Teferi, Hero of Dominaria was another interaction piece that I was looking at, but honestly, who wants to play against or with a Teferi? The Eternal Wanderer I kind of liked mostly for the wipe, but there are better wipes that get more synergy with what we're trying to do. I have a soft spot for Venser the Sojourner, usually for the blink effect, but I was somewhat interested in the second ability, as opposed to say something that gave all my creatures trample. I still may swap it in at some point. I really wanted to fit Space Spellern in the deck, but 2 whole rounds before you can get 1/3 of the board wipe was a bridge too far for me. If I ever make a wacky version of this deck, Space Spellern probably makes the cut. Finishing off the Planeswalkers is Vivian, Champion of the Wilds, whom I'm mostly interested in for giving flash to all my dudes, though this is probably just icing on the cake. Sometimes that's just nice to have, but it doesn't really help the deck. Really, any legendary lands will work since you have some synergies with them. Manamo's School at Water's Edge is really good, Rivendell is also really good. And that's all for Alistair the Brigadier. I hope you enjoyed the video or at least got some cool ideas on another deck that you might want to run. If you want to help out the channel, you can always watch another video or check out my Patreon. Otherwise, have fun playing EDH, and I will see you around.